I'm very pleased that we have Jonathan Dunner here to chair our last panel. He's in the Technology for Emerging Markets group at Microsoft Research India in Cape Town. And also a member of IMTFI's External Advisory Board, and we're just delighted that he was able to be here today. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Bill, and to the Institute for hosting all of us. It's been an exciting couple days, and I hope our last session won't disappoint. It's got one of those good titles that should keep us going for a little while. Institutional cultures and regulatory framings limit cases in mobile money adoption and uptake. So I think we've got an opportunity to challenge the status quo a little bit and push our thinking a bit on where mobile money is headed. So it's a pretty light duty for me. I'm just going to try to keep us on time and direct some questions at the end. But we'll follow the same format we have for the previous panel. So unless there's a specific question of clarification that comes up, let's try to hold the conversation until the end and maybe do some integration between the papers if that opportunity presents itself. So without further ado, our first paper is by Katur Sugianto and his colleagues on resistance to e-money in poor remittances receivers families on the case of Lombok Island in Indonesia. Thanks a lot.
Good afternoon. The work that I will present is a collaborative work with my graduate student, Tiar Mutiara Santiuli. She is with Kacamata University and majoring information system and tourism. And the other one is Zuroton. She's sitting over there. She is also a graduate student majoring in accounting. And we also agree that I will present the work and both of them will answer the questions. First of all, we would like to thank to Prof. Bill Maurer and Jenny and also the IMTFI teams for enabling us to go to the field work, which is about 2 hours flying from our hometown, and then another 20 hours flying to come here. And we have a great time in Irvine. The title of our study is Resistance to E-Money Among the Poor Remittance Receivers in Lombok Island in Indonesia. The situation is that we have been sending young and productive workers abroad, and they create opportunity for a better life to their family and relatives who were left behind through remittances. Most of them in a big group coordinated by a private agent like this guy. And the man is giving a brief instruction before all of these young ladies entering the airport and then doing the checking and so on. So most of the migrant goes to Malaysia, Arab Saudi, and also recently in Taiwan and Hong Kong and also South Korea, the favorite countries to work. So if we are here in Irvine and then we can, I don't know, flying or swimming across the Pacific Ocean, we can find Indonesia over here. And Lombok Island is like, if this is Java Island, so eastern part is Bali, and then this is the Lombok Island. So they flew right from the island, go to Jakarta most of the time, and then go to Malaysia or Arab Saudi. And we pick Lombok Island because its Human Development Index is ranked like 32 out of the 33 provinces in Indonesia. Okay, so the question is that, well, we are trying to answer whether there has been changing in the way the workers' family manage their remittances from cash basis to mobile money or e-money? And would the demand for these modern ways of managing money develop in the island? If not, what factors that hinder their development? We visited about 200 households in central and eastern part of Lombok Island, and we visit only those who has at least one family member who are working abroad, and we ask questions related to how the remittances sent from the worker to the family in Lombok and how they manage the money. Here on the primarily side, most of the uh, most of the persons that we met are women, like about 66%. And the way we choose whether they are coming from high level or lower or middle level of living by identifying the house, the building and the house. So talk to them, and then most of them like 20 to 40 years old, like 78%, and they have elementary education, like 6 years education. 50% of them, and then 30%, 20% has a secondary education. And when we ask about the occupation, most of them answer that they are farmers. The money that they receive, most of them coming from Malaysia, like 83%, and then only 60% coming from the Middle East, like Arab Saudi, and then Abu Dhabi, and also that area. The remittances were wired through the bank. The bank, most of them, like 46%, and then the other, they pick Western Union, about 30 to 35%. The Western Union work together with Indonesian Post institution and also the Pound Shop institution. This the Pagadian. This institution is the Pound Shop. Okay. But we also have MoneyGram and also other private bank who can help them to wire their money. So then we have the traditional people embrace with the modern institution, start from this kind of activities. Basically, when they cash the remittances, is very easy. They have to just show the PIN number from the SMS, and then show the ID. And the other thing is they have to fill out the form. And this is the tricky one for the receivers, because they don't know how to fill out the form, and then they have to ask to this is the take on here is like private agency of the workers who help them to fill out the form, and then come standing in front of the line, and then so this is the old guy who received the remittances, and then the young man who will help them to fill out the form and so on. And actually, this is the kind of the form that they have to fill out. And even though they are young women here, they still need some help to fill out the form. So they bring the PIN number, they hold the handphone, and then ask the security in the office to help them to fill out the form. Even they get together, like 3 of them, sitting at one desk, and then the security tell them how to fill out the form. So there is no privacy, and then there is no secret among these 3 persons. Okay. In addition to, so these are another picture about the private or unlicensed worker agency who help them to go to the post office, and then to go to the airport to, even giving them money for the airport tax. So they help them to finish to do the checking in the airport. So the private worker agency is really helpful for in the eyes of these workers. Sometimes we also have, like, the workers ask their friend who coming back to give the money to their parents or the beneficiaries. So they happen that if we go to the airport, there are so many people crowd. They are waiting for their remittances. So just accept an envelope from the relative who are working abroad. So this is the picture about that situation. Okay, so with that kind of portrait, then we try to identify what the familiarities with the modern institution and the technology before using the mobile banking or mobile money. When we ask whether they have a bank account, most of the receiver answer no, they don't have a bank account for saving or handling the money. So about 68% answers no, and then from them whether they have ATM card or not. So about 80% of them doesn't have any ATM card. But when we ask about the mobile phone, the cellular phone, yes, 80% of them has the cellular phone. So that's the kind of technology, a modern technology that they have for the remittance receiver. And we wonder whether is it a start to asking about the next mode of payment, like the e-money or mobile money. So when we ask about whether they will use the e-money or mobile money, these are the reason why they choose not to use that the new mode of payment. We follow the RAM and SET papers about resistance to innovation technology. The first, they said that, well, they don't think about the usage of the benefit of using the mobile money. So we have usage barrier, and then the social barrier, image barrier, race barrier, tradition, and also advantage and also accessibility. So what we mean by the usage barrier is that, well, they said that mobile money is not easy to use, not convenient to them, and not easy to understand. So we try to, explain what is mobile money, and then still it's difficult for them to understand. And they thought that, well, mobile money is only for a high-level class, like the rich person, and they thought that they will use the mobile money when they deal with a large amount of money, and then they thought that mobile money is only for well-educated people. Okay. They also thought that the new technology and the service are difficult to understand, and the mobile network is hard to access. And the last thing, they thought that, well, they need a traditional face-to-face banking service. So when we go to the bank, it means that they have to talk to somebody, not just punching the handphone, but they have to talk and then discuss some other things. So that's our results. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. So we again, we'll take questions at the end for all three presenters. Our second paper is Betting on Chance in Colombia by Anna Evicherri? Anna? Okay. Thanks. Come on up. And Copelia. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you.
Hello. So we're Anna and Copelia. We work with a research network that is called TOCA and is based in Chicago, but we actually live and work in Colombia. We are part of a network of local researchers. So in this case, we're going to talk obviously about Colombia, and our project is Betting on Chance in Colombia. And this project is really about how game networks that are the ones that manage lotteries, and Chance, which is the name of a less expensive alternative to lottery, how these guys have been the ones that have gotten closer to poor customers in terms of offering financial services, or at least transaction services. Let me see. Okay, hold on a second. I need to show you those pictures so you guys understand a little bit about how it works. So it's basically, those are like small booths that are located in every corner store, basically every corner in the country. And there are some street sellers that just walk around with that type of data phone, or sometimes it's called PAC or POS, POS, whatever. So, but you can buy Chance at any of those retail points, so to speak, okay? Now, there is something that we need to make clear, and there is a value duality here, because Chance is a betting game anyway, and in some contexts that might be a questionable practice. However, we're not really dealing with the betting part, but with the other side of the network that provides the rest of the services. So we do acknowledge that it's less expensive than lottery, that can be played daily, that the poor are the ones that play the most, and that it sometimes can mean that they get hooked on playing that and they won't make much money. That's true. But again, that's not where we are really focusing our research. What's interesting here is the addition of all those services. In Colombia, when you send a remittance, it's part of a postal service, which is they are not dealing with money like banks, but they are just serving as carriers of that money from one place to another. And like Timothy said, like from Kenya, like he was saying, where they are just transferring actually data. It's just like that. So they are not dealing with bank stuff. At the same time, those same networks can work as banking correspondents. But those are different services, because actually in our research, what we found is that the users of the banking services are other people. I mean, people other than the poor. So it's kind of like a different user group, so to speak. Okay, so they have the reload. Am I doing fine? Okay. You can reload, for example, utilities, like energy. You can prepaid by a PIN number and then recharge energy at home. So people use it just to recharge, for example, 2,000 pesos which is like $1 in energy for the home. So that's kind of like what they do. The good thing is that these guys, by selling lottery, they have already covered basically the whole country in every corner store. So we have 46 million inhabitants, and there are just in the booths, there are 56,000. And that's without counting the guys with the packs, with the data phones. So it's huge coverage. Okay. Now, just to give you a picture of what Colombia is like in that sense, we have 46 million people and the same amount of phones, mobile phones. We have supposedly our unemployment is like just fine, 9.9. But the problem is like from the other 90%, 51% are informal workers. That means no formal employment. And 70% of those work on the streets, like street sellers. Now, our government in 2006 started a financial inclusion initiative, and so far, this is more or less the result. In banking correspondence, 7.7 billion in 4 years. In the meantime, and without being part of the financial inclusion effort, remittances have moved $3.8 billion a year. So people are still using game networks. I mean, and mobile phones do not enter in the picture of finances, services, or anything. So that's kind of like the interesting part. Now, to tell you more or less what we did was to focus on those informal workers, especially street sellers, because they are such a big part of the informal population. And what we tried to do is just with video ethnography, we were trying to answer, is it like then, if we have so many mobile phones, but we still use the game networks, so how is it that those services fit into like their lives, their behavior? And what can we learn from that in order to leverage the fact that we have so many cell phones, but we're not using them? That's pretty much it. Okay. So this is a way also to show you more or less the context these guys live in. It's a highly vulnerable population. Colombia has right now a bunch of like different issues going on at the same time. So many of those street sellers, if you start with the right upper corner, you see informality. We have a word for that, rebusque, which is research, but instead of researching a topic, they are researching for any bit of money, like searching and searching. So there's no income stability. It's very low what they make. It's not under $2, but for living in a city, less than $10 is already nothing. And the unemployment, which is really high. If we go to the bottom in the right, we have an armed conflict, and I don't know if you guys, I mean, supposedly we are in peace talks with guerrilla, but then we also have Bakrim, which is criminal bands that emerge from, I mean, they come from the phenomenon of the narco traffic, but they became criminal groups doing other things. Anyway, so we have a dispute between different states, the formal state, the government, and these other guys that want to take over in a way. I mean, not the government itself, but they are the ones that want to control the economy, so to speak, especially public space. Here, we also have the other thing that they have to face, which is restrictive regulations. And it's like in Colombia, still regulations are not good for poor people. Banks don't want to let the government include, I mean, like the financial inclusion type of services, they don't work with their business models. So they are kind of like reluctant to that type of offering. Plus, they don't have access to credit. Most of them is because they have already tried to get a loan and failed, defaulted, lent their name, his or her name or whatever, but like someone didn't pay, and so they have no credit, and there's no way to get even a loan for a microfinance institution because they are reported to a central risk office. Anyway, the other thing is the high banking costs. So if a person has $100 in a banking account, in 3 months, it's gonna cost them $50. And it doesn't help their credit history. It doesn't help them with payments. So what's the use? I mean, it's totally useless. So anyway, okay. Finally, because of the armed conflict and narco traffic and all that stuff, we have had a lot of displacement, people that have had to move from rural areas to a city, having nothing but what they are wearing. The other thing because of all that violence is parental absence. And finally, because of parental absence, what happens is that kids need to start working when they are kids. So once you start working and your food depends on your work in the day, so you're not going back to school. I mean, that's kind of like the problem we have. So it's highly vulnerable population. Instead of focusing on trying to validate statistically our research, what we try to do is to contrast behaviors of people. Our theory is each context or a context will generate responses, different responses from people, so to the same context. So those reactions, those responses reflect the values of that person, what that person thinks is important or not important. And finally, if I understand what are the values that drive the decisions of people, then I might be able to use it to create a better solution. So that's more or less what we did. So we were interested in contrast, not numbers. So here, for example, you see some tags that more or less tell a story about the person. If the person is dependent, not independent, if they are control freaks with their money or what they do, or if they are super organized or not, if they adapt to whatever comes every day. So that's kind of, and this is part of them. Now, so we're going to show you some examples, more or less, of what we have found. It's just a few of them, so I hope I don't take too long. The first one, like when you see, in theory, many banks and many institutions are worried about, like, let's have multiple points of contact with our customers for one single service. And then when you talk to people or when you see what they do, is that they use one, not one physical, but one point that adapts to all their needs. So many of them do different things in one of those game networks, the booths. Like they buy at the same time, like they buy cell phone minutes, plus they pay some bills, they buy utilities and things like that. And it's always the same process. Because in Colombia, that's the other thing. Like when you have your utility bill, and then you have your payment at the bank, it's a different format, it's a different ID number, it's a different account. The process is completely different. The guys in these game networks, they make it simple. It's just like the same thing. Like, you want to play this, what's the number, what's the money, and that's it. You want to pay your services, what's the number, what's the amount, that's it. Same ticket, okay? So we found that for them, that means a lot, and it's the integration of all services under a very more important than one interface or than one device. It's the same common process, very simple process. Okay, right. Example 2 is that when there's a void, someone or something will fill it. So if they don't have access to credit, what will they do? Borrow from criminal bands. So we have a very huge phenomenon with payday, and it's that a person may borrow, for example, $50, paying $10 in interest in a week or 15 days, and they have to pay every day, but they actually like it. I mean, the experience is actually good. First, it makes a service accessible, and second, because it's so short, they actually focus on repaying. Again, we're not talking morals here, like if it's ethically good or not. It's just reaction. Other people just borrow from informal lenders like friends, suppliers, or invest in their own merchandise because they know that it's going to increase value over time. Another example, there is a difference between being short-term minded, or having your mind short-term. Did I say that right? Okay, there's a difference between that and managing short cycles, which is if you're used your whole life, if you make an investment in the morning in merchandise and you're used to cashing out at night your revenues and holding on to that, what's the name? Like start like investing capital for the next day. Working capital, like to start a business. Sorry. Anyway, so yes, but that's what they are used to doing. So these are my earnings, then I have $5, and this is what I need. That's called plante in like slang, in Colombian slang. So I have my $15 to buy merchandise tomorrow, and that will generate my other $5, $10 at the end of the day. So that's not being, but I'm so sorry, I'm gonna use an expression, but one of them told us, you know, we're poor but not stupid. So it's like short cycles, not short-term mind, okay? So it's very important. They are used to, like they like very much everything that it's about consumption, and then I pay for what I need. Electricity, I know how much a light bulb will consume, so I'll buy, okay. I guess the point is clear, isn't it? Okay. So, sorry. Two other findings that are really important. Then we found that bending the rules of public space is key for them. So we have here an issue that it's about informality and illegality being two different things. When you don't have a place to work, an office, or you don't pay rent, your place to work and strategic place, it's a corner on the street. But there's a conflict between the public space as a good thing for a community. So the state will not like that. But there's a problem here in terms of there is a territorial establishment and there's a permanence. So if you rent a shop, a space to do your business, then you have a credit history. But you can spend 15 years in the same corner and no one will recognize that as part of your credit history. I mean, it should be, because that's your place, that's your source of income. Okay. There's also a territorial part, and there are fights between people just to gain access to one place. And different people will have different strategies to stay in one place. So for example, that woman over there, she's discussing with the policeman and saying like, yeah, she doesn't have a public space permit, but it's that in that writing, it doesn't say that where she is illegal. So it's like, I'm in the corner, but I'm not stepping on grass, then I'm not using the street, so it should be legal. Okay. This other guy, what he does is like the police comes and asks for the public space permit, and he knows he's not gonna get it, but he asks for one every week, so he gets a card or a letter that says it's in process. This other guy, he plays music in buses, so the guy here allows him to get in the buses. He works for the bus company, and allows not only him, it's like 20 different singers, and they take turns and ride for like a mile and just play music and get some money. So it's an informal agreement, like some complicity going on there. And finally, there's this other guy that what he did was, I'm not gonna have problems with the police in public space. I'm just gonna go to a shopping mall that has a public area and I'll stay there. And he refused to leave. And so the merchants have no choice but to finally let him be. And now, I mean, he's even using the chairs of the restaurant, a table, and he has lunch there, and he's, okay. So from that, there is an important thing, which is public space becomes an intangible asset. So it's currency. It's something important. Having a public space permit, that's money, but it cannot be cashed. Okay, so, and they wouldn't do it anyway, so. But in any case, we thought that this is very interesting because, for example, some of them know exactly how much they can get, but they won't do it. because that's their source of income. And other people, it's the illusion of getting one place where they can stay, or inheriting a place from a son, like in her case, or from a father. So no one will claim that space for them, from them. Okay, so now going back to a big picture. So those were different examples, like isolated examples. So we tried to reconstruct what those findings were and what the values reflected a little bit. We weren't thinking about it at the beginning, but we found like that whole bubble of public space, it becomes an informal economy within the formal economy. And it has its own rules, it has service providers, like a whole chain of like economic activity going on there. However, all the values relate basically to the same issues. So if I take, for example, to be regarded as a decent worker, because just the fact that I don't have a public space permit doesn't make me a criminal, that also impacts finance, like who I am. Why am I not recognized as being an important part of society if I have been selling here things and helping people for 20 years? I just don't have a public space permit. So it starts touching different areas of life. Okay. Now, going back to the tools that they use, then we found that game network services are just one little piece of the puzzle. That game network services are basically remittances and buying prepaid services. But there's no credit. So credit goes up and down here, and all the service supplier provider relationships, they have not been addressed by any service. So it's like the area over there has not been addressed by anyone. There are solutions on this side, not on that one. So I think I forgot to say something, but I don't think I'm just gonna go back. Okay. There's a paradox emerging from all those patterns, which is informal workers, they are in the middle of illegal and formal. But they are, by the state, they are treated as illegal. By illegals, they are formal. But all of them, they are caught in the middle, and one wants taxes, the other one wants extortion money. And so they end up using illegality, which is borrowing from payday loans to pay for public services, for school, for food. So it's illegality to finance legality, informality to support formality, but they are still informal. So it's kind of like the paradox that we found. Opportunity areas. So, okay. In opportunity areas, we found basically 4 to just go back and try to offer solutions, like not specific solutions, but ideas of how that can be used to improve their services. So it's basically about helping them to become more eligible for services, amplifying value, simplifying access, supporting continuity. These are just examples, and they're just ideas, it's in process. So one of the things is, for example, if the public space ID they get, if it could help them show not only that they have been for some time at some place, but it also shows that they always buy some fruits in the morning, like $10 in fruits for the last 20 years, that should mean something. Same thing, how long they have been staying in a place. And that information should help through the city to make them like a guild, an association of people, so we know how much money they move. So we can use some alternative way of saying, you know, they have no property, they have no house, but they are not going to leave their place of work. So that's when we what we can have as a guarantee that they are going to pay back and things like that. So, and if they become a group, like a guild or something like that, for example, in Medellin, there are two basic farmers markets that are the ones that supply everything for the city. And there's one huge retail area that has an association too. So why can't the city and MFIs help coordinate and create special programs that can help visualize them, give them special, just recognize how much they actually put into the local economy and give them special incentives. Am I losing you? Like everyone's falling asleep. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna change. Amplifying value. This is what we were talking about. Like these people are used to getting the money in the morning and cashing out, like it's basically getting the balance of the company at the end of the day. Why is it that no microcredit institution, bank or anyone can help them? I know it's not economically feasible, but if it's just $7 a day for a while to help people start, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about getting people out of poverty, but at least ensuring that they have something to eat at the end of the day. If we just fix that part, we'll make a lot. It's going to be a lot of progress. So being able to borrow money and pay back in short cycles, it's going to be much easier for them to manage as a loan than trying to promote that they get a company and then you're going to become an entrepreneur. It's about sustenance, not entrepreneurship. So the other thing is just to build on the existing platforms, the Ghana booth. I'm saying Ghana, it's the name of the company. But those booths, plus cellular phones, plus the data phones, that can be brought together to simplify access between companies. Okay. In terms of simplifying access, is back to what I said before. It's like, what if they can pay everything with the same step process? It's kind of like a branded process. So a bank, a loan, your car payments, microcredit, insurance, it's all the same process, easy, quick. And finally, to support continuity, and this has been mentioned already by different people, it's like our users are actually groups. It's not a person, it's not a personal service. A user can be a family group or friends group or other type of group. And in our case, what we see a lot, and it's not women, it's not the father, it's the one that manages better the money. They all gather what they have for the day, and that person makes the decisions, and that's not question. It's flexible contribution, shared contribution to a household. So if one of those persons, if instead of charging per every time I send money, you have a user group and they all pay like a group amount, they could be able to adopt this type of service more easily. Now, finally. Final thoughts. The problem that we see in our country is that the current model favors or privileges who has a business plan. It also is looking for increasing formal banking accounts. And that's not the problem. That's an indirect measure of financial inclusion. I can have a bank account and not use it. So increasing the number of banking accounts, what does that say? It doesn't say anything. We need to focus on credit. And the government should stop trying to regulate rates with the banking system and focus on transparency. Just free the rates, but make the process transparent for people. Focus on the right thing. I'm done.
I just checked with Kevin, and he does deal also with things at the edge of legality and illegality. So we have a really nice combination of 3 papers here. Thanks for setting the stage with both of those. We've got a third continent up as research is concerned anyway. Let's welcome Kevin Donovan, and we'll have a conversation at the end. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Donovan. I'm a researcher at the Center for Social Science Research at the University of Cape Town. And this is part of a larger study on the history and implications of a large social protection cash transfer program in South Africa, which is a significant poverty alleviation program that the government runs. The roots of this program are in actually the 1920s with the so-called poor white problem in South Africa. And since then, it grew under apartheid, was eventually deracialized in the lead up to majority rule, and today more than 10 million people receive a small cash grant every month in these 3 main programs, which are an old age pension, a child support grant, and a disability grant. As many of you know, there's been considerable interest in linking cash transfer programs to financial inclusion and using it as a way to kickstart. But before those second order effects can be realized, the government to citizen payment system needs to be implemented reliably. So how does a middle income country plagued by corruption, poor infrastructure, a huge swath of geography manage to implement such a system? My approach has been to look at the assemblage of rationalities, technologies, and subjects. And the duration of this presentation is to highlight how a particular rationality, quantification, and a particular technology, biometric identification, have sought to standardize and format the subject, namely the poor South Africans who receive social protection. This serves all as a prehistory to the financial inclusion questions, which I will briefly address at the end. So one of the striking characteristics of the post-apartheid era has been, in social policy, has been the enormous amount of data that has been generated. Reams of statistics, dozens of formal reports and models, reports and articles, all drawing very heavily on quantitative evidence. Now, South Africa has long had a historical mania for measurement, as one observer put it, and during apartheid, the data was used as a key modality of power to control how the majority population moved around the country and what work they could do. This experience fits with many of the critics of quantitative mentality, who, both the left and the right, who say that quantification and statistics are an exercise of power that leads to instrumentalization of people and the erosion of expertise. But I want to suggest that it would be a mistake to see the statistical proliferation in post-apartheid South Africa as the imposition of some power elite. Instead, the growth of quantification and social protection has actually been a result of democratic contestation increasing. So similar to how the rule of law constrains arbitrary subjective power, quantification offers a rule-bound method for decision-making. Thus, it is a pursuit of objectivity, meaning the removal of discretion that has driven the specific form of rationality in post-apartheid social protection. 2 larger political and social contexts drive this reason, why people feel that objective evidence in the form of quantitative evidence is necessary. On the one hand, the social grant program has been vilified as an irresponsible expenditure that creates dependency among the recipients and encourages perverse outcomes like teenage pregnancies amongst women who want access to the child support grant. This widespread belief and ideology in South Africa has spurred an investment by the government and others in rigorous quantitative impact assessments showing the positive social and economic influences of the grants and the lack of perverse incentives. In this way, and tying into our discussions of trust earlier in the morning, statistics serve as a technology of trust, enabling cash transfers to work on a large scale. On the other hand, South Africa has a highly engaged pro-poor civil society, many of whom are academically inclined and affiliated with the universities there. These actors have encouraged the growth of quantitative data by serving as what Craig Hetherington, in a very different context, calls guerrilla auditors, actors who enroll larger techniques and discourses of accountability, transparency, and efficiency in their own agenda. So civil society has actually been one of the larger generators of this quantitative information, and they've measured and monitored the uptake of grants, their effectiveness, and the budgetary possibilities of expanding it. So the quantification of the poor is actually often done on behalf of them in contemporary South Africa. But I don't think this pursuit of objectivity and quantification is without worrisome downsides, and I think there are 2 worth pointing out. First, by providing a synoptic overview, statistics demonstrate a great affinity with centralization, and this has been the case in South Africa as well. They're conducive to a sort of technicist politics and policy making. So they create centers of calculation, and in the case of South Africa, even though there's been democratization in the past 20 years, there's also been, paradoxically, a great centralization of decision making within an elite that have wielded power, in some cases ideologically. So there was a large debate around 10 years ago over extending the grants to universalize them and provide everyone with a 100 Rand grant, which comes to something like $12 or so a month. And this would be a really important way to make sure that those that are currently missed by the grant program are included. But it was shot down by this very small group within the government that was able to use a different ideological, or as they put it, philosophical difference to avoid having to argue around the evidence of it. Secondly, while the abstractness of quantification seems to be necessary for this action at a distance, this scale at which social protection in South Africa works, it's a particular way of knowing, and it tends to occlude other ways of knowing, especially the thick qualitative description that people in this room are committed to working with. So during my engagement with practitioners in South Africa, it became clear that the South African state's quantitative knowledge, very broad and thin, of the grants tends to be at odds with the more embodied, lived reality that the civil society and grassroots organizations have. And it's not clear to what extent these are commensurable. So managing the distinct consequences of this form of rationality, which I think is probably relevant in many of the social protection programs and is often overlooked in my view, seems to be an important political project deserving more scrutiny. The second component of what enables the social protection in South Africa to work are biometric technologies. Over the past 9 months and continuing for the next 3 or so, the government and its contractor, a company called Net1, which is based in South Africa but listed on the American Stock Exchange, has begun enrolling an unprecedented 21 million South Africans in a new biometric identification system that captures photographic, voice, and fingerprint data. This initiative is only the latest in a long history of biometric pioneering in South Africa, and a major part of my research asks, why is South Africa so far ahead of the rest of the world in accepting this, and what are the implications of it? As biometrics spread elsewhere and on other social protection programs and also in other financial inclusion initiatives, for better or worse, I think they could come to be considered as central to financial inclusion as mobile phones are today. So part of the reason why South Africa is so far ahead or so out there on its own in the use of biometrics at this point is historical. Fingerprinting was first used in South Africa in 1891 and quickly became a tool of labor recruitment and control. During apartheid, it was infamously expanded as part of the passbook system, and in the post-apartheid era, it's also been key to the way that the state manifests itself in the daily lives of the citizens. But it's also been plagued by difficulties throughout these years. Technical problems, especially a lack of interoperability amongst standards, have stymied the main biometric database, which has been about a year or two away from completion for well more than a decade now. Yet, even if the database is troubled, every South African still carries a mandatory ID book that this gentleman has here and is fingerprinted as part of that process. So as an American steeped in suspicion of government and the sanctity of privacy, I have to admit my surprise at the lack of controversy surrounding this enormous increase in biometrics in South Africa. Some people speak of distinct cultures of identification, whereby South Africans are culturally predisposed to different identification regimes than, say, Americans. There may be some truth to this, but I think it would be a mistake to consider their culture of identification as immutable or uniform. Indeed, there are reasons to think that the acceptance of biometric technologies in South Africa is more nefarious than originally thought. The contract awarded for this social protection program has been plagued by allegations of corruption, most recently 2 days ago, prompting a formal investigation by the American FBI, Securities Exchange Commission, and Department of Justice. Just more routine, the matter of fact is that many South Africans are suspicious of fingerprinting, but grantees are in great need of the cash that comes through these programs, and they often see them as gifts rather than the constitutional rights that they are, So if they're gifts, they feel that it's wrong to complain too much about the administrative practices of the biometrics. Furthermore, there's limited public participation in the design of the implementation, especially from parties that are familiar with the dangers and difficulties of biometric technologies more broadly. In contrast to wealthier economies, South Africa does not have a strong privacy lobby, does not have strong data integrity laws, and it's led the closest observer of biometrics in the country to note that the types of systems undertaken in South Africa are, quote, simply inconceivable in most of Europe. So if the social construction of biometrics in South Africa has been largely uncontested, what is the construction made, and to what extent is it an accurate one? Like quantification, biometrics are an effort to remove subjectivity from policy implementation. They're another instance of this pursuit of objectivity that I think has defined the social protection in post-apartheid South Africa. The most pressing form of subjectivity or discretion that biometrics seek to eliminate are illicit access to the grants. Although it is enormously difficult to measure accurately, there's general agreement that the grant program is subject to widespread fraud, and in the context of financial conservatism in South Africa, this is seen to be deeply problematic. So the new contractor, this company, Net1, was chosen largely for their promise of removing duplicates or ghosts from the grant program. And the government proudly notes that thousands of individuals have voluntarily returned their grant card because they thought they were going to be caught by this new system. Yet there's reason to believe that the pursuit of objectivity and perfection is mythical. In his study of communications technologies, J.D. Peters says that it's a mistake to think that communications will solve the problem of communication and that better wiring will eliminate the ghosts. And he's surely right in this case. While some illicit access has been caught and will be caught, and others will be deterred, the use of this technical fix will surely fail and fraud will endure in the system. Failure in biometrics is not extrinsic or some aberration to the system. Rather, it is inherent in the use of any technology. The fundamental conceit of biometrics, that bodies are stable, unchanging repositories that can be turned into information in a database, is wrong. Biometric failure has to be understood as ordinary and not unusual, and it is linked to race, class, gender, sexuality, and disability in uneven ways. So already these are showing up in the South African case, which is only a few months old. Biometric scans can be stymied by something as simple as a cut on your finger. In winter, stiff, cold fingers are often not recognized by machine readers. Manual laborers, especially women who have spent years doing domestic work, like washing dishes, a very popular job in South Africa, or very common job in South Africa, often have unreadable fingers. In some cases, a government representative told me it will be necessary to have a procurator for the entirety of your time in the system, thus undermining the idea of individualized and accurate identification, and also increasing dependency on another person. And these are only problems when the finger actually meets the machine. The fact that these are situated practices means that errors are inevitable in the enrolling and the use of the biometric technologies. So even with an improbably low error rate of 0.1% in a sample of 20 million like South Africa, 20,000 people are going to be misidentified, more than the number of people who voluntarily canceled their cards already. This ubiquitous mess will continue to interrupt the same mythology that has plagued apartheid government's panoptic vision, but this doesn't mean it's meaningless, and I want to suggest two more speculative areas of impact before turning to the conclusion. The first is the potential to depoliticize grant making, and the second is its intersection with more contested questions of financial practices and inclusion. So the acceptance of biometrics as a functional, accurate technology connects to a wider discourse that often castigates the poor for their situation. In seeking technical fixes to illicit grant access, the effort overlooks the root causes of inequality and poverty and explain why people are seeking to enter the grant system. Simplified technical systems allow for a yes or no answer rather than complicated negotiations. So the sympathetic street-level bureaucrat is increasingly a faceless machine, pictured here. For example, low-income women would often share details on how to pass the means test and get access to the grant program, perhaps for multiple grants, and then they would qualify. Formally, this may be fraud, but I want to suggest that the calcification of rules that serves to undermine what is a perfectly legitimate livelihood strategy in a situation of rampant and durable unemployment in South Africa. This is certainly not a universally held opinion. Many would say that rules exist, they should be followed, and if you don't like the rules, you should work to change them. Yet the reality is efforts to change the rules have been stymied and they're not viable for most South Africans, especially those in the system. What is viable is what James Scott calls infrapolitics, the everyday acts of dissimulation and such as grant fraud, or as our friends from Colombia explained in the issues of public space. What biometrics and the broader technicization and surveillance of grant administration does is curtail this form of politics and resistance. Politics now requires getting inside the black box, or silver as it were. This is the biometric system that MasterCard and Net1 created for South Africa. But presuming that this technological system is objective or neutral is deeply mistaken, for the removal of subjective discretion is deeply biased towards those that control the technology. And understanding and contesting these forms of submerged politics is an important consideration for how technology and development interact. Finally, and given the audience, I'd like to suggest a couple areas of financial inclusion, although this is the least established part of my work at this point. The contractor for South Africa has partnered with a bank such that all grantees now receive their money into a formal account accessible through a MasterCard debit card. Thus, in a matter of months, the number of banked South Africans grew considerably. What this means in practice, though, is much less clear. South Africa is unique, both in Africa and in many countries, for the presence of both a very large and sophisticated financial sector, as well as a very large population of poor citizens. There's been a history of abusive and reckless lending, including through automatic deductions to the grants, such that stories about people who cede their entire grant to moneylenders are commonplace. It's also common for moneylenders to confiscate people's cards and PIN numbers to access their grant before they're able to do so. While this is illegal, and there are laws prohibiting lending against the grant income as collateral, it still happens, and there's a recognition, in contrast, that people should be able to enter into financial agreements, especially for funeral insurance, which is seen as widely important in South Africa given the AIDS epidemic. Furthermore, there are many in civil society who are suspicious of formal lenders who may sue defaulters, whereas informal lenders may break your kneecaps, but they're part of the same community and therefore may operate within a more moral economy than the large corporations lending. Less likely, and they're less likely to send people to debtor's prison or blackball them for the rest of their life. How to balance this trade-off or manage this trade-off is also unclear in the South African context. While in South Africa, I've been working with civil society and government and industry to understand how to proceed with some of these, what some see as a win-win situation of financial inclusion, but what others see as a highly problematic exploitation of the poor. The shift to bank accounts and electronic payments may exacerbate this as automatic deductions spread. Another issue is that the company that is implementing the system also has subsidiaries that are keen to lend to low-income, bottom-of-the-pyramid people who receive the grants. They, at this point, think that they'll be first in line to do automatic deductions. So what does this mean for other people who may not, or other lenders who may not have any money left over to do it? So there's a question of what is fair commerce in this situation. It also connects to issues of sharing grantee data for credit scoring or other commercial practices. This has civil society up in arms. Call it the dark side of financial inclusion. Digital banking means digital data trails, and in South Africa, the implications are still being grappled with. So as a very brief summary, perhaps I'd like to suggest that this specific rationality, quantification, and the specific technique, biometric identification, are not unique to South Africa. The forms of surveillance that they represent, the standardizing and formatting of the poor, are not intrinsically malicious, even though I have deep reservations about them. Indeed, they seem to be necessary components of what is, at the end of the day, a highly redistributive and pro-poor program. The complexities, though, that I've sought to draw out suggest some very tough questions that I'm having difficulty answering definitively, so I'd be quite keen to hear other people's experiences elsewhere, especially because in the coming months, UCT is going to be expanding this work to look at other parts of Africa, so I would hope to collaborate with some of you there. Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for questions. Let's give all the presenters one more round of applause before they switch. And if there's a roving mic around somewhere, just shoot your hand up and we can get going with questions. Thanks. There's the mic. Where are the questions? There we go.
Yeah, thank you very much for the good presentation for all. Yeah, I'm a bit intrigued by the last presentation about biometric measures. It is really, given the fact that Kenya is trying to say that now biometric measurement is going to provide solutions to the process of voting. And I've heard you mention some of the really unforeseen flaws and limitations. Like, of course, people have already complained that, fingerprints, they'll be distorted and so on. So I was just wondering if you have any solution, proposition, what will be the fallback when all these things are not working in the construction of precision in measurement? Thank you.
Let's see if you want to do this. We've been taking one or two questions. Why don't we take 3 questions and sort of see how it gets distributed, and then take comments from there. So I see 2 hands up in this row as well.
Yeah. Actually, eye-opening presentation on biometrics. The same case, it's more of an observation than a question. Well, we are having a lot of debate in India on UID card. This based on biometrics, including the government is basically planning to bring everybody under that system of biometrics, and there are many people who have actually questioned it. You have made some of the observation, like the persons with disability who have no finger, they have no hands, and if they are visually impaired, then how do you manage getting biometrics of them? Then, I'm not sure, maybe you have doing research on that, you will be in a better position to answer that. These are the projects which were rejected in US and probably Australia. If you have any idea why they were abandoned by the government there, but is still being adopted by governments like South Africa and India. Will be good actually if you throw a little light on that.
Let's take one more question, and then we'll see if we've got time for a second cycle.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentations. I have a question for Kevin on South Africa. And I was just wondering, do you have a national identification system? And if you do, why didn't you use the same national identification system for the grant program? Why do you decide to use a different system for the grant program? The other is just a general comment that the poor, the informal people are generally suspicious of the financial inclusion agenda. They're suspicious in that they think it's exploitative. And I like the last quote that Donovan had. Financial inclusion means that the money is not with you. I like that quote. And I think financial inclusion for the poor, they look at it as an exploitative system, largely because it's based on capitalism. And if you study informality in general, you will find that it is not based on capitalism, it is based on something else. So there's a big tension, and we really need to understand for financial inclusion to succeed. And this is why I said yesterday that probably we have solutions looking for a problem. We need to understand the problem. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we, Kevin, those are a couple directed to you. Why don't you respond to them, and then we'll take another set of questions on the other papers.
Sure. So one of the reasons, this is working, right? One of the reasons that biometrics have been rejected in OECD countries is because they have alternatives. So vital registration, civil registration exist in ways that they don't in much of Africa. And that's important because basic demographic data and health data relies on a level of registration and a level of citizen to state interaction. But there are also less sanguine reasons, and that's because there's a lack of opposition and a lack of understanding in many of these situations. And also, the way that they go about implementing them is not always the most participatory or inclusive way. So the decisions get made behind closed doors or by a small group of people. And I think we have to take the allegations of corruption very seriously, even if they're ultimately unfounded. There's a reason that biometric technologies have been just around the corner from being daily use for the past 25 years, is because they don't really work that well and the market isn't as strong as it exists. So there's a reason that the biometric technologies are sold to places like prisons in the United States or the governments elsewhere, because it's a one buyer that you have to convince as opposed to many buyers. So I think in places like Kenya, I don't know necessarily the fallback option, but I think what's quite important is to raise these issues and to deal with very basic data protection values and systems so that that these databases, if they do get created, don't fall into the wrong hands or get used maliciously. But the fallback, even if it goes to biometrics, is going to be a significant investment. I think there's a danger in thinking that these shiny new technical systems will fix things easily and quickly, and the companies that are selling them have an incentive to convince governments that they'll solve things quickly and easily, and it won't be the case. So whether you do it paper or whether you do it biometric identification, it's going to be a significant investment in the rollout. And to the question on the national ID system in South Africa, they do have one, but the department that runs it is notoriously disliked for how they've managed it, and they run into some, not of all of their making by any means, but so they've had technical problems with managing. It's 50 million people. It's, the United States can't even do it very well. So there is a chance that this social protection database will serve to subsidize the rest of the government, because now they may have a decently good database for 20 million people.
Other questions for, particularly for the other two panelists first, but if you've got a question, yeah? Okay, there's one there.
Very interesting presentations and awesome, Anna. Okay. I have a small clarification from Tiara. When you spoke about the resistance to e-money, what is the meaning of advantage barrier?
I also like the presentations very much. Thank you. All three were excellent. And my question is for Anna. I was very impressed with the way you presented the mixture of legality and illegality in government, in the state, etc. And the way this company is willing to take on some payments because it attracts customers, I guess, or maybe it makes them used to using the lotto as well, because they now know how to use it, so they can. But I didn't quite understand whether, when you're saying that they pay for energy, is energy a state-owned company? I mean, is electricity a state-owned company and the others? So the state is somehow complicit as well in this lotto company. This is my question.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then we'll do a round with the panelists again.
Yeah, good afternoon. Jing Gusto from the Philippines. I'm particularly intrigued with the second presentation from Colombia from Anna in Copelia. What I've noticed throughout the two-day event that we've been focused probably on more or less the user selection or user segmentation. But what I think your presentation more or less showed is about maybe also focusing on the agent, which more or less provides us which provides the face to a service. and somehow the agent in your case is the game operator network. Given your experience, your insights, what do you think are the takeaway points in terms of identifying maybe a good agent in terms of trying to promote whatever we've learned about mobile money, about alternative mechanisms?
Yeah, there was a question about the advantage of using the e-money, and then this basically the idea that why people do not use the mobile money, and number 6 was the advantage barrier. They thought that they are unable to take a benefit of using the money, so they don't have the idea what's the benefit of using that mobile money.
Well, I'll try to answer the best I can. Okay, so the way these networks work, it's basically that the government, in that case, is the one that pays the network for the service. So people, I mean, they are just operators in the transaction, like the collectors, or you just pay for them. So it's never, it never implies a charge for the user. It's only for example, the public utility company as paying for another channel to collect the money. So yes, they become accomplices in that way, but there's one other thing that I forgot to mention. It's like in Colombia, the lotto, 30% of the earnings go to support the health system. So if we're talking morals, like same thing happens with alcohol and tobacco. That's what finances sports. So it's
the same thing.
Kind of like the same. And I hope I understand your question. In terms of that selection, I also forgot to mention one thing. And it's the lotto companies. They are huge associations of companies. And they have to present a bidding process with the government before they can gain a contract, for example, for 5 years or something to sell lotto. And so there is a lot of public attention to who's going to get that contract, how much they are making, is it a transparent thing? So people actually trust the game networks and lotto. I mean, they know those guys cannot hide much. Like everyone's looking at them. So it's more or less the way it works there. But you actually made us think about like a really important point there too, see, in the terms of that selection.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions if there are hands that want to go up. I see one there and 2. They're both on that side.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a reply. I mean, what he gave to, with regard to India on Aadhaar card. I mean, if I understood correctly, you have been saying that because in, in developed countries, I mean, they have a very well-managed system, and that is why biometrics is not needed. I just want to add in that, I just want to connect with that thread that in India, we have a multiple identification system which is working on paper, and along with, we have Aadhaar system, which is a biometric system. And there are a lot of debates going on because Aadhaar is not based on citizenship, it is based on resident. I mean, a resident can be anybody. One, and second thing is that there are a lot of issues with regard to, violation of individual privacy with biometrics and use of that data for, exploiting people of particular community or particular region. So these are the issues which are in discourse with respect to biometrics in India. and which is not being passed by the parliament, and no legislation has been passed on that, but still it has been implemented. I don't know the reason behind it. So actually the question he has been asking, what I understood is that he was asking why it is, despite it has been, abundant in different countries, why there is in Asian countries is coming up, why there is, so much acceptance by the present governments. That's the thing.
Okay, and this is likely to be our last question, so we'll see. We'll have a chance to answer them both.
Hi. At first, thanks for these great presentations. I would like to ask one question to Kevin about the data. So you specifically mentioned the risk of statistics, because I'm thinking about now most of the effort we are doing now maybe based on the how to, let's say, from the operational perspective. So I have one question about actually the research perspective. So this means I suppose we would like to use a data set which based on a more a broader kind of a scope, meaning that macro scope, which the data is collected by, let's say, some organization. So regarding the risk of statistics, do you mean that there is some risk that happens or occurs in the process of collection process, or the risk could be resulted from the statistical analysis by using this kind of data? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the question in it. But maybe I'll explain it a little bit on the need. First, on the biometrics, the argument relative to wealthier economies is that I think there is a need for civil registration and there is a need for vital registration. I'm platform agnostic as to how that happens, whether it's old school or new school, but I share your reservations about the biometric technologies and the way that they're often pushed and implemented, and also kind of the cultural mentalities around them, as they're often, as the gentleman said, solutions where the problem doesn't always exist. So there's this idea that there's a technical fix that can solve what is in reality far more nuanced and complicated and not inclined to be fixed by technology. As to the issue of statistics and quantification, who's invested and created and generated the statistics in post-apartheid South Africa are predominantly the government does the large panel surveys, and the census is that under apartheid didn't count vast swaths of the population because they weren't of interest to the apartheid government, and they're quite good at making those figures available. So on the one hand, numbers need to be understood as being generated because of democratic contestation. It's a result of the disillusionment with subjective discretionary power, so people flee to numbers which are considered objective and rule-bound. So in some ways this constrains the arbitrary exercise of power. You have to play by the rules, right? You have to play by the statistical rules, and you can't completely make things up. But paradoxically, perhaps, it also leads to a centralization of power because it allows a central authority to understand the world in a way that it couldn't if everything was qualitative, messy, and a mirror to reality as opposed to a synoptic view. So, there's pros and cons to it, and the argument is that we need to understand both. I hope that answers the question.
With the last minute or two, do either of the other panelists have reactions to some combination of the papers, or a clarification, or anything that you guys want to make? No? No? Okay. I just have one thing to say as a quick discussant or whatever. It's been a very interesting panel for me, and I thank you guys all again for this. It's very nice to have 3 papers that aren't so exclusively focused on these artifacts that we're instead talking about practices, right? And you've got, each of you bumped into, complex human practices that predate the technologies, whether it's the contestation over place and the kind of ascribing of meaning and value to place, or the helper roles that that we've seen pop up in other systems like this, very well-intentioned systems, whether it's deed rights and registering your property, or cashing in for a loan or a remittance or something like that. These relationships between people who know how to navigate the systems and don't. It's almost like whatever system you build, we're gonna find those things again. It's important to kind of bring that into our research. And Kevin, with some of the things you invoked again of people finding ways to make most of the systems as presented to them, whether legal or not, but as a livelihood strategy, I think. These are three of the type of papers that I really kind of come to expect out of the Institute. And so thanks for putting this panel together and for all the papers in general. And thanks for everybody for your attention this afternoon. Thank you.